Good morning, and welcome to today's episode of Urban Green Live with John Mandyke and Dr. Joe Allen. I'm Diva Scoville, the Associate Manager for Programs here at Urban Green Council. Urban Green Council's values are excellence, inclusion, collaboration, and engagement. We invite you to be mindful of these values today. And with that, I'll kick it over to our CEO, John Mandyke.
Thank you, Diva. Good morning and welcome to everybody. Welcome to Urban Green Live. I'm your host, John Mandyke, the CEO of Urban Green. This is a program series where I interview global experts to better understand how we get to a net zero carbon future and also to discuss all the fascinating trends in the sustainable built environment. And you get to participate too, because we're going to have Q&A in just a bit. Today, we're going to go back to where we started 5 years ago when Urban Green Live was launched during the early and frankly terrifying days of COVID, from my home to your home. And it was really our first Zoom broadcast at Urban Green. And to make sense of that moment, we turned then to one of the world's foremost experts on healthy buildings and indoor air quality, and that's Dr. Joe Allen, director of the Healthy Buildings Program at Harvard and the assistant professor at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. 5 years later, we have Joe back on the program because so much has transpired with healthy buildings since then, and so much more is on the horizon. So, Joe, welcome back to Urban Green Live.
Thanks, John. It's always good to be back chatting with you to talk about these kind of things. Kind of wild that it's been 5 years. Certainly lots happened.
It has. And the biggest thing that's happened is not the last time, but the first time that we did our Zoom with you 5 years ago, you were in your neighbor's driveway in your car because you didn't have internet, and I was in my living room. So look how much has changed.
Right, a house full of kids doing homeschool, and my Wi-Fi went down. I borrowed it from a neighbor. I think there was a plow going by or something in the background, but somehow we got through that.
We did. That's awesome. Well, thanks, Joe. And I think this is about your third or fourth guest appearance on Urban Green Live since then, and we really appreciate it. So let's dive right in. It's hard to believe, as we were just talking about, that it's been 5 years since COVID changed all of our lives, not as least of which is the human toll that we've all gone through. More than 1 million Americans lost their lives from COVID, and maybe as many as 7 million worldwide. What do you think we learned the most over the last 5 years?
Yeah, I'm glad you started with the human toll as we get into these kind of lessons, because I've been thinking a lot about that, and because I think there's an effort lately to kind of downplay just how bad it was, right? You mentioned 1 million deaths. And I see a lot more right these days where people are saying, well, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad for me. And I think there's a little bit of this kind of survivor bias happening. In epidemiology, we talk about survivor bias. So the people who are out on social media talking about maybe it wasn't that bad, well, the people who got through it okay. And of course, millions didn't, and many millions globally. So I think we have to be cautious as we kind of revisit and think about what we did right, we all could have done better. But I'm glad you opened with that frame, right? This was a novel virus, and it was a disaster. It was a public health disaster. So I think what we've learned, honestly, I think, is the power of it was a reminder of just how deadly pathogens can be. I think maybe a lot of us have gotten complacent over the years without the pandemic. Oh, it's just the flu. It's just a cold, and then you realize that these pathogens can change and then rip through the population where there's no immunity. So I think probably it woke a lot of people up to just how bad things can be when a pandemic hits, and pandemics change societies. In terms of other things, I think we learned. I think we also learned the power of science in two different ways. One, the power of science to get us a bridge to vaccines. So the biggest win in science was the rapid deployment of vaccines that saved many millions of lives. There's no question that happened in rapid time. In months, this vaccine was developed and deployed. The other part of the science was that the science gave us the bridge, or could have in many cases, to get us to the vaccine. For example, non-pharmaceutical interventions, simple mask wearing, simple at-home rapid tests, which really weren't around. the recognition that buildings play a key role and can help keep us safe if we use them right. So just to wrap that up again, I think it's the key trend is like we realize that we could lean on science to get us through this early tough phases, get us to the point where we have a vaccine or solution that can provide population level scale benefits. Now, there's lots of complications in that. It took a lot of time to get there. But in terms of the lessons out of this, it's the severity of these threats that we still face. Now that COVID is kind of receding to the background for most people's minds. But we can rely on this good science to get us through these things.
So many people, turn to health experts like you in those early days just for understanding, for direction and guidance. Did the pandemic unfold the way you expected, or what were the greatest surprises that you saw as we went through?
Yeah, I don't think it unfolded like anybody really expected, other than we knew it was going to be bad and real bad, and it took us a minute to wake up. I think the area where it didn't go where I thought it was, I've done these kind of forensic investigations of buildings for a long time, 20 years of my career doing this. And to me, the problem was recognized and obvious early. In January 2020, I tried to land a piece in the New York Times. Hey, this thing spread through the air. That means your building matters. That means ventilation and filtration are going to play a key role. And I thought it'd be a one and done. Like, oh, we just have to get the message out. Like this is how you keep safe. And I couldn't land it in the New York Times, so it was pushback on this idea that it was spread through the air and that buildings were important. So that was late January. It was my first indication, like, okay, maybe this message isn't going to get through. But eventually landed it in a piece in early February that healthy buildings mattered. And finally, in early March, the New York Times did pick up this article I wrote, which basically laid out the case for how this is spread and buildings matter and all these other things matter too. So I guess if you asked me early on, it's like, okay, we got this message out. It's March 2020. The US is kind of scrambling in its response, but we actually know how to keep people safe from viruses, be it coronaviruses or influenza or anything else. But that was clearly wasn't the case. I think it was 50 something op-eds later across every major news outlet and TV and every way we could, seminars like this, webinars like this, trying to get this message out. So it wasn't as simple as I thought originally. Okay, I'll write one piece and everyone kind of agrees that buildings are going to play a key role, but it took years for that message to sink in.
So you hinted at this about, we 5 years on now, we've all learned to live with COVID one way or another as individuals or communities or societies. And in many aspects, it's almost ancient history, right? Kind of that was then, this is now. So if this is now, how would you assess the state of healthy buildings today?
Well, I mean, yeah, COVID has become it's in our back of our minds at this point because we have population immunity through immunization and infections, right? So it's causing a lot less severe disease, still causing a lot of severe disease. But in terms of what's in the rearview mirror from COVID, I mean, right now we're in the middle of one of the worst influenza seasons of the past 15 years. 24 million illnesses, 300,000 hospitalization, 13,000 deaths. Influenza, like COVID, is also spread through the air. So as it relates to this healthy building strategy, I think we have a lot of momentum during COVID to advance, good practices around buildings, these healthy building strategies. But despite massive spread of influenza right now, plus COVID spreading, public's attention really doesn't seem to be focused on this. You see a headline here and there about the influenza season. That said, I think there's been incredible momentum in the healthy building space. Whereas maybe we were talking about this, you and I have been talking about this for a long time. I think some people were. I think a lot of people talking about it during COVID finally. And a lot of great organizations implemented these healthy building strategies. Great companies, schools across the country, many did this. And there's some new efforts around new standards and codifying best practices, and even buildings right in New York City going up that are built to these higher standards of good air quality. So that is a big shift. I think where we've lost a little momentum is we don't really have the public's ear so much anymore. There's a lot else happening in the world, that is getting the attention. But I think in the building space and the building trades, good companies are paying attention to this and already making moves to kind of adopt some of these healthy building strategies that many started during COVID and many more adopting.
Right. So let's transition and talk about what's coming next. Um, I know there's a lot of new IAQ sensor technology that's coming into play. What's your take on those? What will they do and what will they change?
All right, I love this. And because like you, right, I'm a business person too. It's the classic business maxim. What gets measured gets managed, right? And so we've been flying blind with indoor air quality. We just haven't had the tools to assess it or the public to assess it. So it's taken scientific instrumentation, devices that cost $5,000, $10,000. And now you can get these lower cost air quality monitors. I have a couple right over my shoulder right there. I have them in my house. People have them all over. Schools are deploying these. And to me, it's a total game changer because for the first time, really, the public, an employee, a customer, businesses can actually deploy at scale some of these low-cost air quality sensors to start to take the pulse of the building. They're not scientific instruments. They don't measure everything, but they measure a handful of these key indicators that can kind of tell you, is there an issue in the building? So it measures things like CO2, which is a proxy for ventilation and occupancy. It measures things like PM 2.5, airborne particles and dust. Give you a sense of how well your building's performing with regard to outdoor air coming in and how well your filters are performing. TVOCs, total volatile organic compounds, these airborne gases. So temperature, humidity. So it's measuring a couple things, but the difference is it's not just someone in the back room measuring it in one spot. Anybody can have access to these, walk into a building, and with some assumptions, get a pretty quick indication of what's going on in the space. I think it's a total game changer. I've seen it change. So I advise Amazon. Amazon has rolled these out, air quality monitors, in all of their corporate offices globally. Globally. That's incredible. Boston Public Schools, I advised them during the pandemic. They now have real-time air quality monitors in every classroom that they share publicly. Denver Public Schools does this too. LA Public Schools have started to do this. So you start to see this shift where it went from, oh, these are kind of cute things that people are playing with, maybe posting on social media, to the really good organizations starting to recognize, hey, we can start monitoring this. And once you monitor it, then you know maybe everything's fine. Or if it's not, you know where you need to take corrective action.
And are those like available to the public? Like, what would happen if people just start bringing those to work?
People are bringing them to work. I work with a lot of different organizations, and this is happening every day. In fact, it's a little bit of a warning call, I think, to some organizations. If you're not monitoring this, you better believe people in your building are. If you're an investor, an owner, a developer, a tenant, you work with schools, you better believe that these devices that you can get online, anywhere from $100 to $300, people are carrying these around. So they're showing the data on social media. Poke around on Twitter, poke around on other social channels. You will see people posting indoor air quality and shaming companies. On the other side, I've seen people bring this into work and tell their employer and share it. Here's a screenshot. These levels are not safe. What are you going to do about it? So it used to be, and I've done this for a long time, used to be someone would go in, tell their boss, hey, I don't feel right in this space. It's stuffy, it's stale, I get a headache when I'm here. And a lot of these were just dismissed as, oh, that's a complainer employee. But now an employee can say, I don't feel right in here. I'm going to bring my device in. And you know what? Wow, the CO2 is actually high, or the particle levels are high. I read this article. I have an article in Harvard Business Review on these air quality sensors, if you're curious, and actually put down what numbers you should be looking for. So someone totally non-technical can have one of these devices, see the particle levels, say, hey, they're at 20. I read this article that says that's not okay. And now they can go to their employer or whoever and say, it's not just me subjectively saying it's not right in here. Look, there's hard data. So it's a total game changer. It's a power dynamic shift where the power is now in the hands of employees and customers and the general public, where before this was largely hidden from view for people who, you don't really know how the air is in a space unless you're measuring.
A different take on disclosure, right? Like to your point, like without data, you can't make decisions.
You can. And actually, I think it's a path towards being smart about investment. So I've seen people say, and even there's some legislation that's trying to be passed where it's like, hey, we need to do everything in all of the schools. Well, that's a lot of money. I'm all for doing everything around healthy building strategies, but it's actually a smart way to say, you know what, let's measure first. And it turns out classroom A needs filtration. Classroom B needs this. Classroom C needs a temperature fix. And maybe other classrooms are okay. So it's actually a way you can be a little more targeted and efficient with your spending. So you're not just blanket doing things you don't really know what the impact's going to be. Let me tell you, I think this is important for your readers about a trend. So not only are we have these low-cost monitors, and people are measuring in their buildings. In fact, I was at a building a couple of months ago doing a walkthrough, and I asked someone about the air quality, and they said, I mapped the whole building. They told me about air quality in every space in this building, just an employee in the building. But the trend is accelerating. A couple months ago, ARPA-H, which is the Advanced Research Projects for the US government, but ARPA-H is the health-based arm of this, put out a request for proposals around developing new sensors, indoor air quality sensors, that not just don't just measure things like CO2 and particles, but actually measure viruses and bacteria, with a goal of commercializing this within about 5 years. Major money, millions of dollars. So it tells you that right now people are running around measuring CO2, but can you imagine in a couple of years, if these are successful, that people have monitors that actually tell you how much influenza is in the air? It's really concerning to me because I think it's going to be a little bit of chaos. I think it's really hard to interpret things like this. There's virus everywhere all the time. But so what? If you have devices that measure it, people are going to be out there measuring this stuff. So I think it's a good idea. That's why I wrote this piece in Harvard Business Review. It's a good idea for business leaders to kind of start getting a handle on this technology, what the measurements can and can't do, because it's only going to keep increasing in terms of the things we're able to measure at low cost. And not that far off, 5 years, certainly 10 years, you'll see devices that measure at cost, low cost, actual viruses and biologicals in the air.
That certainly will change a lot. Talking about measuring more things that are around, wildfire smoke is sadly a new reality. From all the way from the tragic scenes we just saw in LA, last month, to literally the orange soupy haze we had here in New York City, by the way, during an Urban Green conference. Talk to us about how we solve for outdoor air pollution with indoor air quality at the same time.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this. I've been out in LA. We have a new study we launched with collaborators at UCLA and USC called the LA Fire Health Study. And I'm one of the professors leading some of the work doing the environmental monitoring. And the pictures are absolutely devastating. But I tell you, when you see it in person, and we were out there in Maui after the wildfires and in LA, you realize it's just devastating: loss of life, loss of businesses, loss of homes, and loss of community. The scale of the impact is hard to actually fathom. And so what we're doing, and this relates to even New York, right, is we see the scale, the increase in the numbers and severity of these wildfire events. And some of that's highly local, but we know that wildfire smoke travels many hundreds of miles. It'll travel across the country, like what happened in New York, the wildfires in Canada. When we see wildfires on the West Coast, we see the smoke impacts on the East Coast of the United States. So the question is, at least what I'm really interested in, is how do you stay safe, and how do you use buildings as a tool here to keep us safe from wildfire smoke? And I think the first thing we need to do is recognize that outdoor air pollution is an indoor air pollution problem. So when there's normal outdoor air pollution or wildfire smoke, when the skies are orange, or also when the skies are just look okay, but we know there's pollution out there, that pollution penetrates indoors. We breathe most of our breaths indoors. Therefore, most of the outdoor air pollution you breathe happens inside. I don't think a lot of people recognize that. It's counterintuitive. It doesn't seem right, but the math is really straightforward. In fact, it could be 5, 6, 7, 8 times more outdoor air pollution is breathed indoors than outdoors. So that means the buildings are set up here to be tools for resilience and keeping people safe. And it's actually some real basics, right? If you have good building design with a good building envelope, and you're controlling the penetrations, and you have your ventilation system bringing in air, if you have high-grade filters, you can actually do a good job of filtering that outdoor air as it comes in, keeping the building a little positively pressurized so you don't have all these little gaps in the envelope where particles come in. And we've seen this even in New York City when the skies were orange. We were monitoring in some buildings with these real-time air quality monitors. And we saw that even when the levels were hitting 300, 400, 500 micrograms per cubic meter, and remember the limit is 9, so outdoors, 3, 4, 500, we saw buildings less than 9 microgram per cubic meter of these particles. Worst you could possibly be outdoors, safe indoors. This becomes a really powerful tool for organizations and schools and others to say, you know what? We designed our building right. We have good filtration. Even though it's bad outside, the air quality in this school or office or home or shop is better than what you'd see outside, certainly, and actually might even be better than what you're getting at home. The only way to do that is to design the building right, use these healthy building strategies, and monitor the air so you can verify that the building's actually performing the way you think it is.
Part of the health discussion with buildings translates to cognitive impacts. And we worked in my different life on some interesting research on the COG-FX study on the cognitive impacts of indoor air quality. But I know you've extended that to look at the creativity, the human creativity impacts of indoor air quality. What has your research found around that?
Yeah, John, you've been great for a long time supporting this kind of work and recognizing that, hey, if we link or think about how to link indoor air quality with cognitive function, it can be a game changer. This leads to productivity conversations and business benefits. So yeah, we've done a lot of work looking at the links between higher order cognitive function and indoor air quality. And we took this global in a big study that we published a few years ago, where we confirmed a lot of the science that we saw in earlier studies that in office workers in this case, when they were breathing air with lower particle levels and better ventilation, they performed better on these tests of cognitive function. So a lot of these tests of cognitive function are tests around how you seek out information, how do you utilize it, how do you make strategic decisions. Sometimes it's math tests. And so for this latest study, we wanted to test the other half of the brain. So your creativity, right? Of course, this is really important for work and school and everything else. So we tested what we call divergent creative thinking. And really that's how do you ideate in the face of questions where there's no standard answer. So we administer these cognitive tests and we're measuring air quality indoors and we find pretty dramatic results again. So across these 4 dimensions of creative thinking, originality, elaboration, flexibility, and fluency, and I can describe those, we see anywhere from a 3 to 11% increase in performance when CO2 indoors is lower. So when CO2 is lower, that means it's better ventilation, lower occupancy. And we see that for things like originality on these tests, it's 11% increase in performance per 100 part per million of CO2. So you put some numbers on that if you're not familiar with it. Outdoors is like 425. Indoors, you might see, if it's good, 600, 700, 800. Most buildings like 1,000 parts per million of CO2. So for every 100 increase, so if you go 800 to 900, we see an 11% increase for some of these dimensions of creative thinking. In a population of several hundred workers around the world, this is not like a US phenomenon. These are workers in good buildings, measured air quality in real time, and the associated performance on creativity tests. You put that together with overall cognitive function and brain health, it's telling a story many years in the making now that indoor air quality is having an impact on our ability to perform at work, to think creatively, to handle these difficult cognitive tasks, even in subtle ways we wouldn't recognize. A 100 part per million difference in CO2, none of us can detect that. But when we measure it, we see that it's having this really big impact on overall brain health. So we were excited to do this one because I think we've made the case convincingly, and others have too around the world, that indoor air quality matters for cognitive function, and really wanted to get to this creativity domain to unlock some new discussions around the positive benefits of healthy buildings.
That's awesome. Where can people find that research?
So if you go to the Harvard Healthy Buildings page, so if you just Google Harvard Healthy Buildings Program, we have a blog, and we always post a short little 3 key takeaways for all of our studies. So we have some really other interesting studies you might tap into, but this new one on creativity, we have a nice little 3 key takeaways blog. So just Google Harvard Healthy Buildings Program and you'll find it.
Great. We're going to turn the audience Q&A in just a bit, so I see them coming in. So please load them up. And I have a few final questions here for Joe before we move to that. So Joe, it's been basically 100 years between the last global pandemic, right? The Spanish flu pandemic and the global COVID pandemic. Are we ready for the next one? And secondly, should we be concerned that these are going to be coming at a faster interval, given, for example, we had 1.8 billion people on our planet during the Spanish flu versus 7.8 billion during COVID? Like, are we ready for what's coming next?
I don't think we're ready. No, I think we learned some lessons that will come through this, and we could talk about some of the positives that when the next pandemic hits. But the reality is, there will be a next pandemic. This is guaranteed, 100%. It could happen today, could happen next year, could happen in 5 years, could happen in 10 years, could happen in 50. Everyone's tracking H5N1 right now, an influenza strain that is now it has the potential to infect humans. We know this, and it also has the potential. Additional mutations happen to spread human to human. If that happens, that has the potential to be another pandemic. So this is currently where a lot of people are paying attention. Could be another coronavirus. It's guaranteed to happen.
Is that the bird flu, the H1?
That's the bird flu, right? So if you're in the news, if you're looking at the news, you're looking up bird flu. This is some of the types of influenza that we're tracking. We've been tracking this one for decades, but it's getting a lot more interesting because it's in many different animals at this point. It is ubiquitous across birds and cattle, and we're seeing this humans get infected. So we haven't yet seen human-to-human transmission. So everyone's paying attention to that. Turns out, if you look at some of the lab work that's being done, this virus has the potential, if it mutates further, to go human to human, meaning we can start spreading it between each other. If that happens, very similar situation to COVID. We have a novel virus that our bodies haven't really seen, have not seen, and it can spread very quickly. Fortunately, we have a vaccine ready to go. It's not like we're in the COVID stage where it'll take many months, but it's still going to take time to ramp up. So, but let me talk about some of the positives. So it's going to happen, right? So we have to be prepared. I think some of the permanent changes that COVID ushered in will be beneficial. The first is, I don't think we'll ever have another pandemic with airborne spread where people don't recognize that buildings matter. I can't believe it took us a year, John, to get people to recognize that buildings matter. You start with, how is it spread? If you think it's surface transmission, you're cleaning all day. You're cleaning elevator buttons. You think it's droplets, you say, put some stickers on the floor, let's just stay back. You know it's spread through the air, the building matters. We will never forget that lesson. I'm 100% confident. That took us a year. I also think there are some other things that could have been released earlier during the pandemic, but it took a while for society and even the government to accept it. These are these rapid tests that everybody got used to. If you remember early in the pandemic, we didn't have those. There's no way to really test. You'd have to go to a shop. You'd have to pull in your
And
car.
in one of our programs, you foreshadowed them.
This was a no-brainer. So you can let people test at home. That's a way to say it. I shouldn't be out in public. You could test kids quick before they go to school. There's just a lot of there's a lot of benefit. Again, it's one of these things. If you measure it, you can actually manage these things. So that's another one that is ready to go. We will have that again. I think the ramp up of the vaccine, these new mRNA platforms are incredible. So I think we learned some of these key lessons. The question is whether or not how society will respond. People had enough of the lockdowns last time, so there'll be too lax of a response. I tend to think once something starts spreading and you see the impact, it changes behaviors really fast. And we got lucky with COVID in the sense that kids were largely spared. Plenty of kids got sick. There were deaths in kids. But unlike a lot of viruses like influenza, the hospitalization rate kids was quite low. Who knows what the next virus that hits? Even in the current strain of influenza that's circulating, the illness rates are really quite high for those under 25. So if you ask me if we have one of these viruses that starts to become a pandemic, starts spreading like that, and it starts impacting kids, my guess is society will change its tune real fast in terms of what it's willing to do.
So, what's next on your research agenda?
So you're not going to like this answer, but I can't tell you. We've been working on something for the past 18 months in my lab at Harvard, and it even has a code name for now, but it's just starting to be released. It'll come out this year. So we're working on some population level analyses on healthy buildings. We built something we think is really quite different. I think it's one of the biggest, baddest things we've done in my Harvard Healthy Buildings program. And so you'll start to see trickles of it coming out this year. It's really population scale modeling of different policies and building level interventions. And you can understand who it's impacting, where, what building strategies lead to the biggest benefit in terms of better indoor air quality, and importantly, energy savings. So we went for it about a year and a half ago, didn't know if it's going to work, took a big home run swing at it, and we think we landed on something that is really quite powerful. So we're excited for the release of data and papers coming out this year.
All right. Well, you sufficiently teased us. You have good promise to come
You
back.
got to invite me back. You got to invite me back. That was intentional.
Okay, well, I have one more question for Joe. So, audience, keep yours coming. We'll switch to them in just a second. We find ourselves today living again in more uncertain times. This time from federal policy, federal funding uncertainties. I know universities and research institutions are impacted. We read about that every day, and I can tell you firsthand that the nonprofit world is impacted, including Urban Green. So, given these uncertain times, how do you approach your work in this environment?
Yeah, I think across the board, I'll just talk about the research endeavor of the country. I mean, the National Institute of Health is the R&D arm, biomedical arm for the entire country. For every dollar we invest in biomedical research, it generates $2 in economic activity. And so I'm very concerned with the cuts that are happening to the National Institutes of Health and what that'll mean for keeping people healthy, advancing basic research, and actually, spurring investment across the entire U.S. economy. So I think this is this will be really impactful in many different ways. So what do we do here? I think we do what we always do. I think there's a lot of things that can happen in the private sector. Good companies are good companies for a reason, right? They act well ahead of regulators and even act on some of the newer science before it's actually standards or policies. So the good companies will continue to adopt and kind of advance these healthy and sustainable building strategy. We're seeing that. I don't see that slowing down. I also think there's a lot of activity at the city and state level. You see what's happening in New York. The good cities, the good states always lead. They've led the federal government forever. And so I think this is where you're going to see a lot of action. And so even the conversations I'm having, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, I still see a lot of interest in kind of advancing the work you all do at Urban Green, the work we do at Harvard, because I think there's a recognition that, the problems we're facing around the climate, sustainability, health, human health, don't go away as a new administration comes in. So that's where I'm focusing my attention. I think there's lots we can do still at the city and state level. And also, honestly, still trying to figure out ways to work at the federal level. Because I don't think it means we throw our hands up and walk away. We got to figure out how to be effective.
Yeah, there's no questions that cities and states will fill the void. They did it last time around. We have Local Law 97 as a exact countermeasure to the first time the U.S. pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. And so cities and states will lead. And as you know, but maybe the audience doesn't know, the federal government doesn't have jurisdiction over buildings. I mean, those are the purview of state and local entities. And so where a lot of these issues come around and these discussions are held, it's really a city and state issue. So that's great. Let's turn to the audience questions we have here. Thank you. First one in from Alex. Wants to know where he can get the sensors. He says, can you share the IAQ sensors you recommended for Amazon and other clients? We are pursuing a few offices for our building in Manhattan, or pursuing a few options for our building in Manhattan.
All right, so I'm super hesitant to endorse product,
sure.
But I'll tell you this.
What are the characteristics people should look for if they're looking for
great,
this?
Great. Yeah, so look for a device that measures carbon dioxide or CO2, PM 2.5, and TVOCs, total volatile organic compounds. I'll point you again to this resource, and again, if you Google Harvard Healthy Buildings Program, you'll find it. But I wrote an article for Harvard Business Review with a title along the lines of "It's time for every company to monitor air quality" or something like that. If you look in that article, I talk about these parameters you should measure and also how to interpret the data a bit. And I list some of the companies that are doing this kind of work. So, I should probably just start naming these things like the ones we use at Harvard, but I just don't like to endorse. I think it's a good market. There's lots of good companies out there doing good things, but if you search around there, you'll find it. But just look for a handful of those things. Don't go too cheap, right? I think I think the good ones are going to be over $100 up to the $300 range.
Okay, great. Thanks. Next question here. All the statistics point to the comorbidity of those in poor health being at greater risk. So, would you see the role of an individual's health playing in the measures that you've been talking about all along? Like are these society, like, I guess maybe to rephrase the question a little bit, um, are we skewing things just because somebody may have other pre-existing conditions that they're bringing to the office, or does that not really matter when you look at it at scale?
Yeah, I think, look, there's a lot of comorbidities out there, a lot of people with lots of health issues. And I think uh, healthy buildings and some of this measurement represent an opportunity to address a lot of these different issues in a couple different ways. And I'll describe it. This is not, if you improve ventilation, yeah, it helps against COVID. It also helps against influenza, but it also helps against outdoor air pollution. It also helps against reducing asthma attacks. It also helps with brain health and cognitive function. So you think about the health issues we're all dealing with all the time, and some people more than others, and you realize that the building is influencing brain health, heart health, your immune system health, your reproductive health, your overall mental health. And if you think about it that way, all these issues we're all dealing with, and we recognize that some of these tweaks we can make to our building, which are not that expensive, can actually benefit across the board, regardless of what you happen to be experiencing, or regardless of the multiple things that all of us experience across all of these critical areas related to our health. We didn't even talk about this research linking mental health, anxiety, depression, mood disorders, and indoor air quality. So you have all of these major benefits coming from what I think are a handful of readily available improvements to a building. Ventilation, filtration, you choose better materials in your space, a couple of these other strategies. So we can start to think holistically about what it is for health and how buildings actually play a role in that.
Here's another question about Washington. How are you thinking about federal politics and their impact on healthy building strategies? Is there more you
Well,
want to
there
add?
was a yeah, there was a lot of movement during the COVID. I was working with collaborators at the White House, the Office of Science and Technology Policy. I think there's still a lot of appetite out there around healthy and sustainable buildings. Things will certainly change, largely because hopefully this is non-political. Hey, we improve our buildings, we save energy, we save money. That's a money-saving technique. Keeping people healthy and productive in a building is actually a way to save money. It's just good business. I think the way we talk about it might have to shift. Um, but I'm optimistic, like you said, John, about where a lot of the action is only so much could have happened at the federal level anyway. So the action on buildings is still at the city and state level for things like standards and nonprofit groups around standard setting and ultimately local regulations and building codes. But also, I think it's about influencing the market. So you see, right in New York, I've advised JP Morgan on the beautiful new building in Midtown. It's got double the minimum ventilation rate, high levels of filtration, real-time air quality monitoring, healthy materials. And so the market is saying, well, we're already going there. This has been 10 years in the works plus. And then what happens? Other builders, developers, investors look around and they say, hey, I want what that building's doing. Otherwise, I'm sitting on a stranded asset that by the time it's built and out of the ground, it's going to be out of date compared to its competitors. So this is where I think, regardless of what's happening at the federal level, there's this movement happening, city, state, and also private sector leading the way. Investors, developers are paying attention to these things, regardless of what would happen at the federal level.
Next item here is more a comment than a question, but validation to what you've been talking about. It's from Kyle. He says, I work at an engineering office and brought an element when we return to work. I give daily IAQ reports to the office. It was eye-opening for many of the employees. So for employees like Kyle who provide those reports, how are you seeing either the office management or the building owner responding to those?
I think it's incredible. Good work. I think people, the good companies respond. I mean, the thing is, if you wait too long, we don't know. We find out buildings are a problem when something breaks down. We're wasting energy. Somebody doesn't feel right in the space. The temperature's off. This is people's health and dollars going out the window. So you can get ahead of these things. And I think you frame it right. Hey, this is good. The building's performing well. That's a net positive for the organization. So I see organizations wanting to do this, measure it, and also let people know they're taking their building seriously, and they can even show the data sometimes. I think there's still an element of the education piece. Why I love what he's doing. Hey, you bring in the sensor, you explain to people this is what it's measuring, and this is why it matters. I think we always forget about the why leading with that. This is why it matters. This is about your brain health, your cognitive function, your lung health, your immune system health. We put in these strategies. And by the way, here's your daily IAQ report. This building is doing a good job for you.
Great. Next question here. Let's see if either of us can answer it. It says, for everyday urban homeowner seeking a contractor, building science expertise is hard to find. Where should a homeowner start if they want to make heat envelope or ventilation improvements to their home, but don't know where to find the right experts, designers, architects, contractors?
I'll start because I just redid this in my house, and and it was hard, and I'm the world's easiest sell. Basically, I told the person, look, I want everything the best. I played a little dumb, like you tell me, sell me on the best air quality. What should I do in my house? I'm going to upgrade and change out the heat pumps, HVAC. What do I do? I think some of the companies that sell these products are missing the market because the last mile, the end user, the sales, the installers, I don't think, at least in my experience, have they haven't had the support from the organizations on how to talk about these things. So I know this field, and I had a hard time getting the best indoor air quality equipment in my own upgrade. Right. So there's a huge opportunity for you. You train people in this space. This healthy buildings market is wide open for you to win. You come into somebody's home and you say, hey, I have an air quality monitor. This is why this matters for you and your kids' health and asthma attacks. Therefore, you should think about doing X, Y, and Z in your place. It is just a huge market. And so far, I've been a little frustrated when I'm dealing with myself to this commenter's point. It's actually hard to know as a homeowner, well, how do I even know it? And I think some of the organizations I've dealt with haven't fully got trained their sales teams out there to actually communicate healthy and sustainable buildings.
Next question here. Do you know of any efforts to support air quality monitors in multifamily buildings, particularly low income or affordable housing, and use that data to improve air quality in the buildings where the most vulnerable New Yorkers live?
This has to be a focus of ours. I don't know of any where that's happening. But there was a bill in New York that was going to try and put these in government buildings and some of the housing. I don't know the status of that. But I absolutely agree. And also, it's the path towards one, serving people who are most vulnerable, two, understanding environments that we know historically have had worse indoor air quality, worse overall indoor environmental quality through neglect and underinvestment for decades. Decisions on how to spend limited dollars effectively. So what do you go and improve first? So I love the idea as a way to measure it. I think there's also a way to use these sensors to not only determine what we can do to improve indoor air quality, but also can actually help us understand energy efficiency. So I think this is a really smart play. I think one of the things that has to happen in the healthy buildings movement is that right now we have a lot of first movers that are taking advantage of the latest science, some school districts doing, but it's a little ad hoc at the moment. I think this has to really get into standards and codes such that it becomes the norm for how you have to operate and design building, affordable housing, schools, or whatever. Because right now you don't have to do it. And then there are some legislative efforts happening in different states that would require this kind of indoor air quality monitoring. I really support them. I think this is absolutely key. It's going to have to become a requirement, and then you can verify how the building is performing.
We have a couple more questions. There's still a few more minutes. If the audience wants to get a few more questions in, type them in now. Maybe just as a follow-on to that, Joe, to get your take. New York City is evaluating a maximum indoor temperature approach. We have a minimum indoor temperature for health and safety because of days like today when it's very cold. We're among the first cities to start thinking about a maximum indoor temperature for the same reasons, for safety and resiliency during extended heat events. What would that do for air quality?
Well, New York City always leads. I love that they're thinking about this. It makes total sense to me, just like we're thinking about buildings to be a way to protect people from outdoor air pollution, infectious disease. It can also protect people from extreme heat and extreme cold. And extreme heat is starting to get the attention that extreme cold has gotten, with hopefully energy subsidies setting these maximum temperatures. So the same kind of thing would happen if you're going to set these maximums or these limits. Well, then you need to measure it. So we have thermostats. We're measuring hot and cold. I think if you include some of these air quality monitors that also measure these other indoor air quality parameters plus temperature and humidity, you can actually start to get a holistic look at how that space is performing. So I love what New York is doing. Of course, it's designed on a sustainability, extreme heat, resiliency focus. But if we broaden that a bit to say it's just overall indoor environmental quality resiliency, it's extreme temperatures, both hot and cold, it's outdoor air pollution, it's ventilation and filtration, then you could start to say, well, this is the monitoring space we need to encompass. So we need to measure these 5 or 6 things because it's going to provide benefits to all of these threats. And then we can leverage the building as a tool that helps against all of these different threats. I love New York City's doing that.
Great. So we have our last audience question here. If there's more, type them in right away. Do you have advice for an individual to prepare themselves and their community on a smaller scale for the next pandemic? We've been talking about big macro things like what can you do in your neighborhood, in your block, in your multifamily building?
Yeah, I think still so that's a great question. And it's like, at its core, what do I do? What do I do to protect myself, keep my family safe? And I think it comes down to some of the basics. This came from our Lancet COVID-19 Commission. Our Healthy Buildings program puts out some of this material. And I think the basics are you want to be sure you have good ventilation and filtration. So make sure you're bringing in outdoor air. You can commission your system, find an HVAC rep, check out your building systems. Make sure you have upgraded filters. We've been talking about MERV 13 filters or higher. This helps against COVID and influenza, but also outdoor air pollution, wildfire smoke. And then you can buy one of these devices, start measuring it so you can see how the space is performing. There are also things like portable air cleaners, relatively low cost, that if you can't fix your ventilation system, you can't upgrade filtration, maybe it's out of your control, you can control your space with one of these portable devices. We have some sizing tools on the Healthy Buildings program to help you at the Harvard Healthy Buildings website to help you pick one that's right size for the room. So some of these simple strategies can be done today. They're just good for general health any old day, but they'll certainly help in the face of the next pandemic. So things you can do right away in your home these are relatively low cost with very high benefits to your health today and also in the face of these other threats.
Great. Well, that's a great place to leave our program on that note. Joe, I really want to thank you for another really informative discussion on Urban Green Live, and thank you for all you do, and thank you for spending time with us today.
Yeah, likewise, John. Thanks. I love Urban Green. I love what y'all do in New York, and keep leading, especially for the next couple of years. Thanks.
Great. I think we have a final slide to pull up, Diva, if we can move to that. We talked earlier about the impact of the uncertain federal time on academia and the nonprofit world, and it certainly has hit Urban Green. We had a record award through the IRA to do Local Law 97 training and education, which is now stuck in the federal funding freeze. And that's put our operations at risk at Urban Green. And so we've launched just yesterday Forward Now, the campaign for Urban Green, which is a tax-deductible donation campaign for those who want to support our work. And I'm excited to say that every dollar that you donate, up to $125,000, is generously being matched by Fiona and Eric Rudin. So this is a tremendous opportunity to double the impact to support 3 areas of Urban Green. One, we're opening a brand new training center, and you see the rendering of it there, where thousands of building professionals will come through for building education. But you can also support our education fund itself and our research and policy fund. So here's a QR code to learn more and to donate, and we hope that you'll support our work so we can continue programs like this and all the activities that we do to transform buildings and to advance our mission to decarbonize buildings for healthy and resilient communities. So, Joe, thanks for joining us. Thanks everybody else for joining us. Be safe out there. Have a great day. We'll see you at the next Urban Green program.